For months, German U-boat crews called it their untouchable kingdom, a 600-mile stretch of the Atlantic where Allied planes simply couldn't reach, and wolf packs sank ships with impunity. The official story tells of triumphant U-boats and a Britain brought to its knees, losing 6 million tons of shipping in 1942 alone. But the shocking truth about what Germany really thought of the B-24 Liberator remains overshadowed. How a dismissed occasional four-engine bomber would soon shatter naval strategy, spark panic in safe waters, and force Admiral Dönitz, D-O-H-nitz, to admit defeat. What did it feel like when the hunters became the hunted and an invisible enemy closed in? This is the crisis that changed the Battle of the Atlantic forever. 600 miles of open Atlantic, stretching from Newfoundland to the British Isles, once formed the heart of Germany's maritime empire. For the men aboard Admiral Dönitz's U-boats, this was not just ocean, it was a kingdom. In 1942, the air gap was more than a map coordinate. It was a living boundary that separated life from sudden death. No Allied aircraft could reach this far. Crews surfaced in broad daylight to recharge batteries, repair deck guns, and send coded reports home. Diesel engines thundered above the waves, drawing in fresh air while radio menace tapped out convoy sightings. On calm afternoons, sailors gathered on deck, eyes squinting into the endless blue. No contrails, no shadows, only the horizon and the steady rhythm of the hunt. Patrols often lasted weeks, but morale held fast. Reports from U-boat war diaries described a sense of invulnerability, even routine. The term "happy time" echoed in mess conversations, a nod to the months when merchant ships burned on the horizon and Allied escorts chased phantoms. In these waters, wolf packs assembled with mathematical precision. Submarines fanned out in search lines, guided by radio signals from Kerneville and Lorient. The mid-Atlantic became a chessboard where every surface boat was a queen, free to move, strike, and vanish before the enemy could respond. Survival depended on the surface. Batteries drained quickly, forcing boats up twice daily. Air meant not just power, but sanity. Fresh bread baked in tiny galleys, men smoked their rationed cigarettes, and the sense of camaraderie grew with every successful attack. Lookouts took shifts, scanning for masts or smoke, but rarely for aircraft. The threat from above was a distant rumor, a problem for those closer to the British coast. In the air gap, the only real danger came from the sea itself. Rogue waves, mechanical failures, or the rare destroyer that strayed too far from its convoy. This daily rhythm bred confidence. The Atlantic Gap was more than a tactical advantage. It was a psychological shield. Every safe surfacing, every undisturbed horizon reinforced the belief that the ocean belonged to the hunter, not the hunted. For months, this sanctuary allowed U-boats to coordinate mass attacks, refuel at sea, and even rescue downed pilots. The numbers told the story. In 1942 alone, German submarines sent 6 million tons of Allied shipping to the bottom. For the men of the wolf packs, the air gap was not just a gap in coverage, it was the very foundation of their war. But sanctuaries can vanish overnight. The confidence built on empty skies and silent radios would soon face a reckoning, as the rules of the Atlantic changed in ways no one aboard a U-boat could have imagined. Admiral Dönitz believed in the power of coordination. His Wolfpack doctrine turned scattered submarines into a single, unified weapon. U-boats cruised in search lines across the mid-Atlantic, each boat ready to surface and relay contact reports by high-frequency radio the moment a convoy appeared. From Lorient and Kerneville, signals pulsed across the ocean, drawing submarines together like iron filings to a magnet. The surface wasn't just a necessity, It was the heart of the system. On calm nights, captains gathered their boats in tight formation, engines rumbling, decks crowded with watch officers and radio men. Orders arrived from BDU headquarters, directing attacks with the precision of a chess master moving his pieces. Every surfaced boat became a node in a living network, free to strike and vanish before the enemy could react. In these moments, the Atlantic felt small. German crews trusted the mathematics of distance. Allied aircraft, limited by fuel and weather, posed little threat beyond the shadow of land. The air gap, 600 miles of open water, remained untouched, a sanctuary where wolf packs operated by day and night. Radio logs from late 1942 tell the story. Message traffic flowed without interruption, and U-boats surfaced to recharge, confident in their invisibility. Patrol reports describe the routine: battery charging, deck maintenance, coded transmissions, all performed under the open sky. Even when a lookout spotted a distant silhouette, the assumption was always a merchant ship or a friendly boat. Aircraft sightings were rare enough to seem like mistakes. Then, in the winter months, something strange crept into the logs. A 4-engine aircraft seen low on the horizon was dismissed as a navigational error. The sighting was logged and forgotten. No attack followed, no bombs fell, and the U-boat continued its patrol unscathed. Officers joked about the phantom bomber in the wardroom, a curiosity rather than a threat. The doctrine held firm: surface, signal, coordinate, attack. The system was working. But the report lingered in the margins of the war diary, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Dönitz's confidence radiated through his orders: maintain discipline, trust the system. The Wolfpack doctrine had delivered 6 million tons sunk in a single year. The Atlantic, he reminded his captains, belonged to those who could master its distances and its silences. Yet beneath the surface of daily reports, a subtle unease began to grow. The ocean, once limitless, seemed to shrink with every new radio contact. For the first time, watch officers found themselves scanning the sky as often as the sea. The anomaly was easy to ignore: just one aircraft, no attack, no pattern. But in the logic of the Wolfpack, even a single unexplained sighting could be a warning. The chessboard was changing, and in the coded chatter between headquarters and the boats, the first hints of doubt flickered into life. The first VLR Liberators arrived with little fanfare, their wide wings and deep bellies stripped of armor and gun turrets, packed instead with fuel tanks that pushed their range past 2,400 miles. What set these aircraft apart wasn't their size, but the technology hidden beneath the skin. ASV Mark III radar, operating on a 10-centimeter wavelength, could sweep the ocean far beyond the limits of human sight or German electronics. U-boat lookouts, still trusting in METOX detectors, scanned empty skies and reported no signals. To them, daylight surfacing remained routine, a chance to recharge batteries, send coded messages, and breathe air that didn't taste of oil and sweat. But the rules had changed. The new radar was a silent hunter, invisible to every warning receiver the Germans possessed. Liberator crews learned to fly low, radar operators' eyes fixed on the green glow of the planned position indicator. Contacts appeared as sudden blips, sometimes at 12 miles, sometimes at 10, always before the submarine crew had any sense of danger. In the space of a few minutes, what once felt like open ocean became a trap. U-boat war diaries from early 1943 began to record a new kind of encounter: aircraft appearing out of nowhere, engines roaring overhead, depth charges tumbling into the water before the alarm could be sounded. Survivors wrote of confusion and disbelief, One entry from U-563 described a Liberator attack in broad daylight, the aircraft closing fast, bombs straddling the hull before the crew could even reach their crash dive stations. The METOX had been silent. The sky, moments before, had been empty. Routine had become lethal. The psychological shield of the air gap, so central to German confidence, was gone in an instant. Every surfacing became a risk. The very act of survival now depended on luck rather than vigilance or technology. With every new patrol, the legend of Allied omnipresence grew, and the wolf packs began to realize that the ocean no longer belonged to them. Night once offered the last refuge. In the Bay of Biscay, U-boat bridge watches braced against salt spray, eyes straining for shadows as their boats surfaced to drink in air and power. Darkness had always been a shield, until the lee light arrived. A 24-inch searchlight, burning at 22 million candelas, swept the horizon with a beam so fierce it could turn midnight into noon. For the men below, it was a sudden, searing exposure, a blinding white circle that meant their sanctuary had vanished. Patrol reports from early 1943 tell the story in clipped, urgent lines. Submarines caught in the open, pinned by a beam that left no time to dive. The new radar, operating on a wavelength their METOX receivers couldn't hear, guided Allied aircraft to within a mile. Then the searchlights snapped on, flooding the conning tower before the alarm could be sounded. Depth charges followed, the ocean erupting in columns of spray and steel. Bridge watch sailors, once confident in the cover of darkness, found themselves targets in a deadly lottery. Survivors described the terror as a physical force, eyes watering, bodies frozen, the sudden roar of engines overhead. The Bay of Biscay, once a routine transit, earned a new name among U-boat crews: the aircraft graveyard. No warning, no escape. The lee light's glare erased every advantage the night had given them. 16-hour patrols meant that nowhere was safe, not even in the heart of the gap. Routine became risk. The line between day and night dissolved, replaced by a single unbroken threat from above. For U-boat crews, the ocean was no longer a chessboard. It was a trap, and every surfacing might be their last. In the spring of 1943, German command circles buzzed with theories and frustration. Allied aircraft, once a rumor in the heart of the Atlantic, now seemed to strike at will. U-boat crews, stripped of warning by the new radar, reported attacks that came out of empty skies. The old routines, surface, recharge, coordinate, had become suicide notes. Dönitz's staff, searching for answer, seized on a desperate remedy: turn the hunted into the hunters. U-441 was hauled into the docks at Brest, stripped of most of her torpedoes, and bristled with 2 quadruple 20mm Flak-Wirlings and an experimental 37mm cannon. Her bridge swelled with extra gunners, 14 men crammed shoulder to shoulder, eyes scanning for shadows. This was the first flak boat, a submarine reimagined as a floating anti-aircraft battery. On May 24th, U-441 made contact. A Sunderland flying boat from 228 Squadron RAF swept in low, its engines roaring. The gunners opened fire, tracers arching skyward, and the Sunderland crashed into the sea. A victory, but a hollow one. The dying aircraft had already loosed its depth charges. Explosions hammered the hull, shrapnel tore through the conning tower, and U-441 limped back to port, one man wounded, the hull leaking. The lesson was immediate. Even a successful defense left the boat crippled and exposed. Dönitz's experiment was unraveling. Allied pilots, undeterred by the new flak, adjusted their tactics. In July, 3 Beaufighters from 248 Squadron found U-441 on the surface. Their attack was ruthless. 10 dead, 13 wounded, every officer but the ship's doctor incapacitated. Dr. Paul Faffinger, a physician by training, took command and steered the battered boat home. The promise of turning U-boats into anti-aircraft platforms had become a liability. Within weeks, the flak boat project was abandoned, the remaining conversions reversed. Meanwhile, Berlin ordered a shutdown of METOX detectors, convinced, wrongly, that Allied aircraft were homing in on their emissions. Boats now surfaced blind, stripped of even the illusion of warning. The Naxos set, designed to detect cinemetric radar, arrived too late and too flawed to matter. Crews faced a new reality. Every surfacing was a gamble, every horizon a threat. The Wolfpack doctrine, built on surface coordination and speed, collapsed under the weight of confusion and fear. No order or innovation could mask the truth. Technology and tactics had left the U-boat fleet behind. May 1943 delivered a reckoning no one in the Kriegsmarine could have imagined. In just 31 days, 43 U-boats vanished from the operational roster. More than 1,000 trained submariners, men who had survived years of Atlantic patrols, were gone. The loss rate soared to 1 in 4 boats at sea. For the crews, the numbers weren't abstract. They watched as familiar call signs disappeared from the radio net, as friends failed to return to base, as the faces at breakfast grew fewer each week. The war diary of U-505 captured the mood in a few clipped lines. Continuous diving, no rest, aircraft attacks without warning. The old certainties, surface by night, recharge, coordinate, had become suicide notes. Survivors described the ocean as a trap, the surface a death sentence. One radio man wrote, "We surfaced for air. Within minutes, engines overhead, crash dive, always the same." In the Bay of Biscay, the threat from above became a kind of psychological torment. Crews surfaced only when the batteries were nearly spent, knowing that every minute exposed meant another chance for a Liberator to appear out of empty sky. The METOX detectors, once a shield, stayed silent. The new radar was a ghost, invisible, undetectable, always present. Officers tried to maintain discipline, but fatigue and fear crept in. Watch rotation shortened. Men snapped at each other in the cramped air. The cook on U-563 scribbled, "No one talks about home anymore, only about the next attack." The numbers told the rest. Out of 118 boats at sea, nearly a quarter never returned. The Atlantic, once a hunting ground, had become a graveyard. For the first time, commanders questioned not just their tactics, but their purpose. One captured officer, interviewed weeks later, said simply, "We were not fighting, we were surviving." By the end of May, the Wolfpack doctrine lay in ruins. The ocean that had sheltered the U-boats now offered only exposure and exhaustion. The men who had once prowled the gap as hunters now measured success in days survived, not ships sunk. For Dönitz and his staff, the scale of the disaster was inescapable, and the orders that followed would change the course of the war. At headquarters in Kurnevel, the radio room fell silent. On May 24th, Admiral Dönitz issued the order that every U-boat commander dreaded. The message, relayed across encrypted channels, was short and final. "Our losses have reached an intolerable level. The enemy Air Force played a decisive role in inflicting these high losses." For the men who had survived Black May, it was the signal that the Atlantic campaign, once the pride of the Kriegsmarine, had come to a standstill. The numbers told the story better than any communique. 41 U-boats lost in a single month, 1 in every 4 boats at sea. Veteran crews, some with more than a dozen patrols behind them, were gone. The wolf packs had been scattered, their coordination broken by aircraft that now prowled every corner of the ocean. The air gap, once a sanctuary, had become a killing ground. Liberators and Sunderlands, guided by radar invisible to German detectors, forced submarines to dive on sight, robbing them of speed, power, and the ability to strike. Dönitz's order did not come with ceremony. It arrived as a blunt directive: withdraw U-boats from the North Atlantic. The phrase temporary suspension was used, but few believed it. In the wardrooms and control rooms, officers read between the lines. The enemy's air power had changed everything. The submarine, once the hunter, was now the prey. The doctrine of massed surface attacks, the very essence of wolfpack tactics, was abandoned overnight. For the crews, the withdrawal was both a relief and a humiliation. Patrol logs from late May describe boats running submerged for days, batteries drained, air foul, men exhausted. The old rhythm, surface, charge, coordinate, attack, had vanished. Now every surfacing was a gamble, every radio transmission a risk. The ocean that had offered freedom now pressed in on all sides, watched from above. Dönitz, who had built his career on the promise of U-boat supremacy, faced the reality that technology had outpaced courage and tradition. The order to withdraw was not just a tactical adjustment. It was an admission that the battle for the Atlantic, as it had been fought, was over. The signal sent on May 24th closed the chapter on the Wolfpack era. The cost was measured not only in steel lost, but in the confidence and pride of an entire fleet. In May 1943, German U-boat forces suffered their worst losses of the war: 43 submarines destroyed, a staggering 25% of their active fleet. Declassified signals from Admiral Dönitz confirmed the shock. He called the losses intolerable and cited Allied air power as the decisive factor. The introduction of B-24 Liberators equipped with ASV, Mark III radar, and Lee lights shattered the 600-mile air gap, turning a U-boat sanctuary into a graveyard. Patrol reports and crew diaries reveal how fear replaced confidence as submarines faced attacks in zones once considered safe. Yet not every detail is known. Some operational records and technical reports remain classified, and the full scope of German tactical debates is still debated by historians. What is clear: the coordinated use of long-range aircraft, advanced sensors, and intelligence changed the course of the Atlantic War. The B-24's legacy endures in modern maritime patrol doctrine, a reminder that technology and adaptation can overturn even the strongest assumptions of invulnerability.